Hey guys, it's Caden. Welcome to another Autism Digest interview, where today I'm joined by an old friend of mine. Back when I was first becoming an adult, I interacted with a bunch of fandoms, including the Over the Hedge fandom, and I connected with this individual, JThePlante, through Discord and that fandom specifically. And even though I was a bit of a troll, he was extremely patient with me. So I figured, as a thank you to him, in celebration of Over the Hedge anniversary, I'd bring him on to co-host this interview with me with the director of Over the Hedge, Tim Johnson. Thanks for
Hey,
coming on, Tim.
hey,
Yes.
Caden. Nice
Hi,
to meet both
Tim.
you guys.
Yes, I want to say that Over the Hedge is my personal favorite movie. It's yeah, it's even though it's like a silly little movie, it's honestly changed my life. So
Wow,
it,
man, that is awesome to hear.
yeah, it was like my personal gateway towards getting into animated movies, and it led me to getting into DreamWorks as a whole. So yeah.
That's so flattering that nothing makes me happier than to think that all of the work we put into these movies can go out there and find people and create passion and even inspire tattoos.
Yes.
Hey,
Oh, you saw the
when's
Hammy.
that?
Oh my
All right.
gosh.
We've
That's good.
established already that a lot of people know who you are, Tim, but for those that may not know you, do you mind telling a bit of your story in your own words?
Sure, I am a passionate person about the art of animation. I grew up in the 60s watching Bugs Bunny and Wile E. Coyote and Scooby-Doo, and I just thought that animation was absolutely magical. So when I went to university, I found that even though I was studying academic subjects, I spent most of my time drawing. I did a comic strip, and I taught myself to do animation with a couple of student films. So I left college in the 80s and began work in the Chicago animation industry, which meant I was in between Captain Crunch commercials, good old-fashioned hand-drawn animation. But pretty quickly, by the mid 80s, the very early start of computer animation was becoming very exciting. And so I joined a company in Chicago and then eventually moved to the Bay Area, to the San Francisco area, to work for a company called PDI. Initially, my animation was all, logo. We call it logo piloting, where you're doing like animated text. But because I was a character animator, I really saw the opportunity in this new medium, computer animation, to tell stories. And so I wrote a couple of scripts, created a couple of ideas for feature films, and all of that ended up with meeting Jeffrey Katzenberg at DreamWorks and getting my first directing gig on DreamWorks' very first released animated feature film, Ants. I went from directing Ants to directing Sinbad, which was a hand-drawn film at DreamWorks, and then Over the Hedge, and then Home. I also got involved in producing and produced How to Train Your Dragon. And so I turned an early love of drawing and cartoons into a fantastic career of making animated features with DreamWorks. Currently, I'm developing a couple of independent animated projects, so I'm still trying to get the next animated film on the big screen.
And we'll look forward to seeing it. Which transitions into my next question. Do you have any experiences interacting with the autism community that you want to discuss?
Well, in the broader sense of neurodivergent community, it is an enormous part of the animation creative community. To be an animator means you need to be very comfortable sitting all alone and concentrating on focusing on an artistic process that in spite of the fact that it's going to be shared with people, it's hard to do animation anywhere but in a very concentrated state of mind. If you're a musician, you can jam with your friends. If you're a dancer, you have a dancing partner. But if you're an animator, you have to think about, gee, this arm is falling and the dress is rising and I'm aiming for 10 frames later. And there's something about the talents that naturally arise within people who have autism, people who are attention deficit or ADHD. I find an enormous percentage of very talented, successful animators come from that community and have found joy and success and bring a very unique and dedicated perspective and voice to the world of animation.
Hi,
I wanted to, may I ask a question?
go ahead, Jay.
Oh, well, not quite a question, but I wanted, speaking of animation, I wanted to bring up how I watched like behind the scenes stuff and how Over the Hedge was kind of pioneering in its time, especially with like the fur textures, which
Yeah.
you know almost any animated movie has now, but back then was a little like that was kind of new back then for 3D animation. And I think the animation still holds up pretty good for the most part. Um, and if you compare, I always compare it to Chicken Little by Disney, which came
Sure.
out just like about half a year earlier. Yeah, Over the Hedge looks much better with only about like half the budget. So I just want to say that DreamWorks, the animation team, did very good for the time too. Still looks pretty good even 20 years later.
Well, thanks for saying so. That's actually a very big compliment because you're right. One of the challenges with animation is it can appear dated either by style or by technology. But more than anything, if you tell a good story with good characters, you're going to have the longevity and ability to be appreciated even long after the film might look technically dated. But I really appreciate it. That's quite a compliment to observe, and thanks for that.
Yes. Well, I want to say one more thing, and then Caden can ask a question. Also, I think Over the Hedge is also timeless because the story is like it kind of is about animals stealing food, and that's something that's probably going to be timeless forever. So, um, even though it's got like the some 2000s elements, you know, like it's got like old flip phones in there, which is kind of fun, but the story as a whole and like the found family thing is, I think, will probably always be timeless. So,
Well, again, thanks. And it is actually, I think, one of the important components of a successful animated film. First of all, like you said, it's, Over the Hedge features animals. And we've looked to using animals to tell our stories since Aesop's fables and ancient Greek stories. There's something timeless about using the metaphor of a sly fox or a conniving raccoon versus a slow, meticulous, cautious turtle that just appeals and has appealed for ages. So, one of the things that I think I always look for in doing an animated film is a story that feels timeless because the characters and what they want and the themes aren't locked into sort of a particular moment.
nice.
I absolutely agree with that. Which transitions beautifully into my next question. Speaking of characters, Over the Heads features a wide range of personalities, some anxious, impulsive, or highly focused. Did you intentionally craft these traits with neurodivergent audiences in mind, or do you see those interpretations emerging organically from storytelling?
A little bit of both, Caden. I think that it when you create a character like Hammy, who has got all of this bundle of energy, but is a hard time wrestling himself into focus. You're very aware that that's an issue, whether it's called ADHD or any other sort of labels. It's just an issue shared by an enormous amount of people, and particularly young people, who might feel isolated or like they have a problem they need to solve. But to show Hammy, who's ultimately the hero of the story, and it's his very sort of energetic personality that allows him to do what nobody else could do. We were definitely aware and trying to be sensitively celebrating the fact that it takes all kinds to make a world. And the fact that we could have all these animals represent strongly different personalities with their own unique challenges and unique superpowers. It was one of the hardest things to do in an animated film, which is typically a shorter film than, say, live action. Animation barely ever gets much longer than 90 minutes. And so one of the hardest things to do in Over the Hedge was telling the story of seven different character arcs and doing it all in the tiny space of 90 minutes compared to like a 2.5 hour live action movie. But if I'm proud of anything in Over the Hedge, it's that we did give, Stella the skunk and Ozzy the possum and all of these different characters their own sort of moment in the storytelling.
And
Yes.
that's why it's a timeless classic.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up something about that. I have Hammy's Hyperactivity DVD actually, and see, like I like that you guys named it that because you're directly like acknowledging that Hammy clearly has ADHD, but you guys didn't treat it like it's any kind of like downside. You treat it like that's like his superpower, and I find that I think DreamWorks has always been good at that, giving characters like quirks that might be considered something negative, but the movies will like show how it can actually be positive. So, yeah.
That's a message I really embrace. I feel like in the world of social media, there's this enormous pressure to be quote unquote, normal or good looking or talented. And
Boring.
unfortunately, you would think that with the huge number of people contributing on the internet, that the result would be celebrating a huge array of the way people look or act or talent. And instead, it tends to focus on one narrowly defined thing. And if you're a young person, you might think, oh, unless I conform to that goal, I'm not going to be successful. It's like I was saying to Caden's first question, within the artists at DreamWorks and throughout the animation community, animation, I think, tends to draw and offer success to varying people within the neurodivergent community because it's a very interesting challenge to fully understand what makes motion and gravity work, as well as understand what makes acting and communicating work, as well as understand the technique and technology of actually making animation. And there's just a powerful ability, I think, for different kinds of neurodivergent talents to have that kind of focus. We all know that attention deficit is actually not the right term. It's more selective attention. And boy, there people in the people with the ADHD label can be some of the most attentive and focused people in the world of talent. And so I really love that our characters in Over the Hedge, but mostly our artists who worked on it, could find success coming from all different angles and abilities.
Awesome.
Exactly. Like that's typical with this industry, honestly. Which leads to my next question for you, going back to characters for a bit. RJ and Vern have very different ways of processing the world. Do you see value in portraying contrasting cognitive styles in children's film?
Absolutely. First of all, as we've been discussing, offering people different role models that don't always conform to the the sort of boring standard of what a hero or success is. So that alone is a nice opportunity, especially to show to young people. But the core of telling a good story is conflict. If you don't have conflict, you really don't have a story. And the thing that made the comic strip that we adapted so exciting was the very different personalities of RJ and Vern. And it's interesting that they could both be best friends and the worst kind of enemies at the same time. It feels like the relationship all of us have with our families or close friends, where we love them one minute and they can make us absolutely crazy the next, and we have to like get away from them. And so, in portraying RJ and Vern with their two different worldviews and how those worldviews clashed, and yet they learn to live with and really appreciate each other and become good friends. That's really the core of that story. And it arises from creating characters that you can relate to that fall away from the most predictable version of sort of heroism and let each of them become a hero because of their relationship with each other.
Yeah, speaking about that, I want to say that it's interesting how RJ isn't like you said, he's not like a typical protagonist. He's kind of a villain in a way himself, which yeah, I think makes the story stronger because I suppose more people could relate to RJ. Whereas in a movie where the hero's like kind of like perfect, that's less realistic. But RJ has
Yeah.
like more of an actual arc where he like learn something valuable, like that basically family is more important than like materialism. So, Yes.
The challenge with a main character, they're always the hard ones. Villains are easy because villains usually have a very simple and aggressive thing that they're going for. But what makes a hero good is exactly what you were saying, Jay, is they have a fatal flaw. They have something in their personality that is stopping them from becoming the best version of themselves. And my favorite stories take that flaw and explore it and put pressure on the character until they have to come up with the inner strength to overcome that flaw. And even Vern, who you would argue is, the another hero in the story, he has to learn to live a little and to stop. He has sort of the overprotective parent problem where he can smother his community of animals by worrying so much about them they don't really get to live. And so each of the characters has to learn a little bit and has to overcome a flaw. That to me is what makes characters relatable, not perfection, but flaws that we recognize that we might have ourselves.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. I think with any media platform, there's always complication in developing what the main storyline or character is going to be. So you make a really good point there, which transitions into my next question. What responsibility do you think children's media creators have when it comes to representing neurodivergent traits?
I think it's an enormous responsibility. I feel very passionately that stories are the way that we start to teach our values and what's important to us to children. You don't just tell a child, be nice to people. You tell them a story about someone who learned to be nice and how that improved their lives and gave them friends and love. You tell a story to a kid, whether it's Aesop's Fables or a DreamWorks movie or or To Kill a Mockingbird, any of the things that we share as kids progress from the simplest of stories to complicated novels and movies. And so, to me, when I make a movie for a family to enjoy, it's very important to me that it does share important values. And the biggest value of all is how do we get along with other people? How do we embrace other people? How do we realize and extend empathy and understanding to other people? How do we, as a film director, recognize that the talents that I have at DreamWorks working with me from the neurodivergent world, I need to understand they will be successful in a different way than someone that might approach animation very sort of gregarious and boisterous and always wanting to be in a room crowded full of people. How do I help someone who's going to do their best work concentrating and having some alone time at a desk, which is very typical of some of the neurodivergent artists I work with? How do I make sure they don't feel left out of the kind of brainstorming and group activities that often happen on a film? And then how do you translate working with those artists into stories that represent the enormity of the human experience, whether that's people of different color skin, people who have different religions, or people whose brain wires them to approach the world differently? The great thing we need to teach kids and adults is empathy, standing in somebody else's shoes. And stories allow us to take a journey with RJ or Vern or Hammy, to kind of become them for a little bit and see the world from their point of view.
Exactly.
Awesome. So I wanted to ask about so 20 years ago, roughly, which, by the way, it's crazy that the movie is about 20.
Tell me
Um,
about it. Yeah.
I I hope if I don't know if you've noticed, I'm sure you have. DreamWorks has been like giving some movies like re-releases in theaters. I really hope that they do the same to Over the Hedge this year. I think it deserves it for like its 20th anniversary, like a theater re-release. That would be awesome.
I would love that. I mean, the power of seeing movies on the big screen just never fades. And even though we've got the ability now to, watch it on our phone, nobody wants to trade that experience for the shared experience of having a story told on the big screen. So
Yes.
I'll pass along that request. Say it's not
Okay.
for me.
It's been it's been long enough too that there's like a new generation like me personally, I don't remember sure. I'm not sure if I even actually saw it in theaters, you know. So like that would be awesome to get that experience. So and yeah.
That would definitely be great. I know I would go to see it
Cool.
if DreamWorks did that. And so, if you're watching this, let's make it happen.
Yeah.
Transitions into my last question. Normally, at the end of these, I ask the interviewee, what does the future hold? But you already answered that, Tim. You have 2 movies in development. So, I'll ask, is there much you can say about the movie without getting into legal trouble? And is it an over the head sequel or live action remake?
I wish we were making the Over the Hedge sequel. I'll tell you a little story about that. We did have a pitch for the Over the Hedge sequel, and the story was going to be that all the animals were preparing for winter and they were all going to hibernate. They were going to sleep through the winter. And RJ said, "Are you kidding? Who wants to sleep for 3 months? We're going to have a 3 month party." Because he introduces them to the local shopping mall, and the animals move into the shopping mall
Oh
uh,
boy.
to have a hibernation party, where the shopping mall is, closed in the evening, and the animals can raid any of the shops they want. Well, we developed for a bit, and oh my gosh, everything seemed to get in the way. There were other movies ahead of us, and there were budget changes, and I got involved in developing several other movies, and so the sequel never happened. But fingers crossed, never say never. Maybe you guys are right. If we get DreamWorks to put it back in theaters, it'll reawaken audience interest, and we'll get a sequel. But
Well, I
in terms of what I'm working on now, I'll give you the exclusive because we're about to put out a press release, but we haven't announced yet. I have been developing another comic strip to adapt to a feature film. And the comic strip is called The Wizard of Id. And it's been around for 60 years. It started literally back in the 60s. And it's a phenomenal story about a wizard that works for a king in a fantasy medieval world. And the king is desperate to be loved by his subjects, so he's always telling his wizard to make his subjects love him. So it's got political comedy in it. It's got sword and sorcery and sort of a parody of Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter in it. And we're about to announce it to the world, but you heard it here first.
all right, nice. Tough.
That definitely
Um,
sounds epic. Anyways, that's going to do it for this interview, guys. Thank you so much to Tim for coming on and sharing his perspective, and for Jay for co-hosting with me. If you guys want to see more amazing interviews, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Autism Digest channel. Pick up our latest issue. That'll be out by the time this releases. You can get that by going to autismdigest.com, and stay tuned for the audio file of this interview to be posted on our Spotify. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.